and I am the Housing and Community Development Department Director for the City of Tucson. I want to welcome you and thank you in advance for your participation and thoughtful comments. As you know, Mayor and Council has voiced their concerns about the housing crisis. We've seen rising rents and home prices, the loss of income that many experienced through the pandemic, and the need for more units for our residents that is affordable to each household. As a result of Mayor and Council's concerns, they tasked our department to develop a comprehensive plan around how we can increase and preserve affordable units in Tucson, to identify actionable goals and the funding that will help us meet those goals. We have titled this effort the Housing Affordability Plan for Tucson. Many of you will remember the process we held last year to develop the People, Communities, and Home Investment Plan, which we refer to as PCHIP. We identified overarching goals to address the various social needs of our community. One of those included increasing affordable housing. The current effort to develop the Housing Affordability Plan for Tucson builds on the foundation of the PCHIP, and we will use this as our roadmap to achieving equitable housing and increased units for persons at all income levels, but especially for those who are low income and vulnerable. I want to thank Ann Chineta, our Deputy Director, and her team who have worked tirelessly on this effort to ensure we have input from all who care about this issue. You are here today, which demonstrates that you care for the future of Tucson. Thank you for your valuable time and input. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping items. We have Rachel Hutchinson, who's our Zoom meeting and everything else technical guru. And she's already told us, and I'll remind you that in the chat, you will find a form that is your way to sign into this meeting. That way we know who has attended. And also helps us to ensure that we can continue communication with you in the coming days. We will also be asking you to complete a survey while we are talking, and we will be able to show the results in real time. So please be ready to respond to those surveys. So I will now turn it over to Ann.
Thank you, Liz. And I want to reiterate Liz's comment, thanking you all for being here today. I know your time is really valuable and really appreciate you showing up for a topic that is really important in our community. Few things to know. Again, thank you, Rachel, who will be helping today in terms of Zoom. So the plan is I am going to share with you what we've been working on. It's based on a couple years of input of hearing how important housing is in terms of a key priority of Mayor and Council and of our community. And so we'll share what we've been hearing and really we'll rely on you all to provide input and tell us what we're missing, what didn't we get quite right. So really interested in getting your input. What we're sharing today is a draft, and based on input we receive from you all. And then we're working closely with the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. That's a commission that Mayor and Council created last year. And so the commission has been a real partner helping throughout this process and will continue to be. We're hoping to take this plan to Mayor and Council as a draft next month and really as get some input and really work to refine it over the next couple months. Let me share my screen. Today, a couple other things to know. Please know there will be time, as Liz said, we're going to do a survey poll. There will be time for some interaction in terms of in a larger group setting, and then we will go into breakout rooms to dive a little more deeper into these issues. So this is the Housing Affordability Strategy for Tucson draft, and want to thank Laura Sharp, who's on here, who created this story map for us to talk about this plan. So the plan, the thinking right now is that there will be 5 sections to the plan. So the top here is essentially the table of contents. There will be an introduction section. We'll talk about data a little bit. The policy initiatives and actions is really the meat of the plan. There's a funding overview in terms of sharing what resources housing and community development receives to support housing. And then eventually we're going to build out some short-term action plans to really map out how to achieve the short-term actions that are identified. One thing I did want to point out right in the beginning is that the focus of this plan is supporting the preservation and construction of housing units. And we'll talk a little more about that, but I'm gonna say that a few times. That's the real focus here of the housing affordability strategy.
Can I interrupt you, Ann?
Absolutely, always.
There was a comment about closed captioning. I don't know if you can do it on your end. Someone was asking if that's possible.
Yeah, with the Zoom, we'd need a third-party closed captioning service or have somebody else in the meeting type.
Okay.
Possible.
Okay. And we can connect with that person later too, and make sure we get the resources they need. So I will say, in terms of the plan, what I'm sharing today will be up on the website in the next day or two. And then that website will be updated regularly. Rachel, can you make sure to put a link in the chat on that? And then as we move along, there will also be a spot to provide more comments, and we'll continue to stay in touch. If you ended up saying that you were interested in receiving our newsletter, we will send updates as we move through this. So the website will be updated, and then we do also plan on having a written report document, as we know that not everyone has internet access, so that it will be easy to print. So the introduction section, we plan on articulating why this is called the Housing Affordability Strategy. And so, what is housing affordability to us? It's housing that a household can pay for while still having enough money left over for other needs that they have. So they pay for housing, still have funding for things like food, transportation, healthcare, and other key things that we know we all need. And then a metric that we will refer to and use frequently is housing cost burden. So a household that is housing cost burden pays more than 30% of their income on housing. And so to us, housing affordability is really not paying more than 30% of your income on housing, so you can afford the rest of those things. One thing I will say, this graphic here is to represent how I'm relatively new to housing myself. I've been working in this field a couple of years, and I'm always amazed at how many terms, how many acronyms, how much jargon, and really how different people define the same words. So in this plan, we do plan on laying out what we mean by the words we're using, and there will also be a glossary of terms. So for instance, mixed income is something you'll see on one of the slides. We'll be sure, if it's a word that people that might not be familiar with everybody, we'll be articulating that in the introduction and/or in the glossary. Another thing the introduction will cover, this is a similar graphic that Liz included in a presentation she gave mayor and council in August. And we heard from people that this graphic was really helpful in understanding housing needs in our community. And so on the left side of this graphic is focused more on assisting the unhoused. And so wanted to mention that the city is working on several initiatives related to that. So for instance, mayor and council not too long ago adopted a housing first approach to really looking at homelessness and trying to provide a roof over people's heads first as the first key step towards stability. The city is also in process of purchasing some hotels to really add to transitional bridge housing. And then we will continue to, we partner with Pima County on supporting existing shelters. So the city works closely with Tucson Pima Collaboration to End Homelessness on issues with the unhoused. However, wanted to show that that's not the emphasis of this plan. This plan, as I mentioned, is really about supporting the preservation and construction of housing units for permanent housing. So moving on to the data, and there will be time to talk a bit more about these, but wanted to mention that the city and the county and University of Arizona did a comprehensive housing market study, and Rachel will put a link to that in the chat. This housing affordability strategy will summarize some of that data, but we'll really refer people to those other efforts. Another effort that the city, another website we have is a poverty and urban stress report, which has a ton of data throughout the city and at the neighborhood level on key demographics that are related to housing. And then finally, Liz mentioned the People, Communities, and Homes Investment Plan. The challenges section of that plan also has quite extensive data. So we're not going to recreate all that, but we did want to share key data, a summary of key data that we think really shows why we're in a housing crisis and the extent of the crisis we're in. So walking through, the first area of data is about population growing. In both Tucson and Pima County, we received some feedback that where we could, people really wanted us to include county data. So we're trying to do that where we can. Housing production, this is straight from our housing market study. Until the Great Recession, the housing production was keeping pace with that population growth. But part of the issue that we're in right now is that since the Great Recession, there has been a slowdown in housing production, and it's still not recovered to previous levels. And so in this plan, when we're talking about funding sources and resources to support affordable housing, housing and urban development sets income limits based on area median income for a lot of the subsidies and programs that they offer. And so in the plan, we do have a summary of how HUD defines the different income categories. So here's the area median income range on the left here. Here's the category. And then you can see in Tucson what that means in terms of income levels for numbers of people in the households. When you, we will, as I mentioned, have this up live in the next day or two. Please know that many of the data slides have additional tabs that you can click through. And so this goes through the different renter and owner households, what percentage of the income categories are housing cost burdened. And here's another way to try to show the percentage of housing cost burdened households. So this is owner on the left, renter on the right. And so for extremely low income households in Tucson, the data, and I will say this is data from HUD, which is always a couple years older. It shows that there are 25,000 households in Tucson at that extremely low level, and about 20,000 of them are housing cost burden. So the vast majority in that income category are housing cost burden. And then the higher the income households, the less likely they are percentage-wise of being housing cost burdened. And so incomes, as I'm sure everyone on this call is aware, Tucson tends to have fairly low incomes, which correlates to having fairly high poverty rates. So the Tucson poverty rate is higher than Pima County's and higher than the state's as a whole, which is a challenge today when we're seeing housing costs increasing at the rate they're increasing. So I'm going to slow down for this slide a little because I think that this is really important. So this does show data by both Tucson and Pima County. I do want to give the disclaimer that it's hard to get really good data that's current data. So the data sources that we tend to look for current rent prices and typical home values, there's some limitations, they're estimates. All of that being said, I think when you look at these numbers, it's really striking in terms of how quickly costs have been going up. So in 2017, the median rent in Tucson was around $860. And that's across all unit sizes. And on a slide coming up, we'll show by studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, but this is an average of all unit sizes. Today, as of last month, the estimated median rent in the area is over $1,200. And so similarly, the typical home value in 2017 across the whole year was $176,000. And today the estimated typical home value is over $287,000. So I really do think that speaks to the challenges that we have in front of us right now. And another key piece to that is, while housing costs are going up by quite a bit, incomes are not going up anywhere near that rate. And so thinking about this as an issue, it's an issue that I think we can agree many Tucsonans are experiencing. And so that is partially why we are referring to this plan as a housing affordability strategy for Tucson. And then this is a chart to really try to put it into more context. So this chart picks a few of the common occupations in the Tucson area and gives the estimated household income based on the data. And so we'll look at the one on the left, a part-time retail worker. The estimated household income is about $13,000. And so based on the not paying more than 30%, the maximum rent they could afford would be $325 a month. But the average rent for a studio apartment right now is $842 a month. And so I think this really starts to help provide more context. One thing I will say is part of this plan, we would really like to highlight and share, if people are comfortable, if people know people that have experiencing housing costs increasing lately that are impacting them, we are looking to collect a story or two to help put more context into this chart. So I bring this up, I know there's many of you on this call today. If you know someone that might be willing to share a story that they have, we'd be interested in talking to them. And then there are 2 graphs getting at supply. Again, data, I'll continue to give the disclaimer that it's hard to get really good estimates of supply. But essentially, what these graphs shows is, depending on the income category, households, far greater households than there is inventory in that income category. Another way, here is another way, same data, but a different way to show it. And essentially, to me, I've spent more time than I care to admit looking at this chart. This is from the housing market study that we did with University of Arizona and Pima County. You start to see, so on the left side are household incomes, and then you start to see the supply and really how many people in lower income categories have to rent apartments that are more than they can afford, and vice versa. To me, this chart shows that higher income households, many of them end up renting lower cost apartments and therefore make that crunch even more impactful. And so with that, I will say part of the idea here with this plan is really supporting preserving and constructing housing units for everyone, because the increased stock really can help overall. The other thing based on the data, and this is specific to Tucson, when you look at the housing cost burden data, we see that it's estimated over 75,000 households in Tucson are housing cost burdened. And so in thinking about finding solutions, that's a number that we keep in our mind in terms of really thinking through housing affordability solutions. And then one piece to this is really looking at housing's racist legacy. We know that racism and housing practices has advanced systemic inequalities and led to housing segregation. And when you see the map of Tucson in terms of ethnicities, I think that's pretty profound. You can see how segregated Tucson housing still is today. And so I'm going to pause there and stop sharing my screen for a second. So that is the introduction and data sections. I'd be curious and feel free to use the chat if people aren't comfortable raising their hand and speaking out loud. So absolutely throughout this meeting today, feel free to use the chat feature. But I'd be curious if people have thoughts, anything that surprised you about the data, anything in the introduction section or the data section that we haven't included yet that you think needs to be a part of this plan.
So this is just commenting on the data only.
Yeah,
No,
so far, and we'll get to the actions and what we're recommending, but wanted to take a moment to stop and see if people have comments now. I think Stephanie rose her hand.
Thank you. There's the bottom demographic you have are people that make around $12,000 a year. I have 12 rental units. All of them are rented to seniors. The lowest, I mean, the minimum amount that Social Security pays right now is about $750. So you're not even including the seniors, and they really, the people on fixed incomes, and they really need to have a separate category, I think.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks for those that are putting comments in the chat box. Oh, Josefina.
Buenas tardes. How are we going to cope with all the high poverty that we have? It's been going on and on for many years. So it's depressing for me. So I have hope that maybe we can work a plan that we can remove ourselves out of this poverty. So I'm looking forward to you, and I thank you all, City of Tucson. But there's a lot of work we need to do together, and I pray we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Josefina. Well, feel free to keep using the chat.
I'm so sorry, I actually do have a question on for the data. I'm trying to find. So I really like that graphic about what income brackets people can afford, or what the different income brackets, what their housing looks like. But I did have a question because it lists the average. I'm so sorry. Yes, this one. So it says that the 100% of the area median income is listed at $64,000. But if you look at Census Bureau data, it's more like 56,000. So is this like, sorry.
A couple things. This chart is the Tucson, it's Pima County. And so there is a different AMI for the city than the county that may explain why the counties is a little higher than the cities.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
So Josefina, that was a good segue. And thank you, Elizabeth, for that comment. So moving on to initiatives and actions, it's important for me to help relay, based on the direction we got from mayor and council, what we're trying to do with this plan and what this plan's not trying to do. And so Liz mentioned the People, Communities, and Homes Investment Plan. That's a plan, a housing and community development put together and mayor and council adopted early this January of this year. Time's been a blur. And Rachel's going to put the link to the PCHIT plan in the chat. The PCHIT plan, People, Communities, and Homes, that's a plan that really guides how housing and community development is investing in projects and working on projects across all the issues that we work in. So on the people side, the thinking there is what can we do and what can we encourage others working in this space to do in our community to help people. So education, thinking about job growth, thinking about workforce development, thinking about healthcare. And so that's focused more on people. Communities part is thinking about neighborhoods and the larger context in which people live in and thrive in. And so thinking about neighborhoods and community networks and the concerns about changing neighborhoods and gentrification and displacement. So that plan talks about all of these things and also lays out a strategy for housing and for homes. And I bring this up because the purpose of that plan is really to show how all of these things are interconnected, and it's a much more general plan. And as part of that, we did recommend the city do a more detailed housing plan. So this plan is focused on the preservation and construction of housing units. It builds off of the PCHIP housing section. In that section, there were 4 priorities laid out, and those are here on the left side of the screen: to increase affordable rental housing, so preserve and build new; to expand affordable home ownership opportunities; to ensure stable, healthy, and safe housing; and to increase equitable housing. So as we identified the policy initiatives to put forth today, we really thought through those priorities, made sure that they aligned with those priorities, and really went back to look at the goals and strategies that were laid out in that plan. And so the plan purpose, really looking at preserving and constructing housing units, but the plan pillars, we're talking about housing units across the income categories, but at housing and community development, we focus on residents most vulnerable to housing instability. So that means persons experiencing homelessness, older adults, persons with disabilities, victims of domestic violence. So at HCD, that is our primary focus. And then another plan pillar that I think is important is thinking about how the housing initiatives align with other key city initiatives. So in particular, climate resiliency, advancing racial and social equity, and supporting our older adults. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Liz. We have 10 policy initiatives. And there are some actions within that. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz.
Thank you, Anne. Great comments in the chat. Makes me want to just be chatting it up, but I'm going to stay focused on the presentation here. So I'm going to turn my chats off. Let me just do that. So let's talk about these policy initiatives. The first one is related to our public housing. So public housing are the units that the city owns. We own and operate. We get a federal subsidy through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to operate. And we've been doing this for many years, as most communities. Over I would say over the past 10 to 15 years, HUD has provided some additional tools with the goal of exiting the public housing program. Part of the issue with the public housing program is there's not enough capital, not enough funding to keep up with capital needs. As for example, we just did a capital physical needs assessment of all our public housing, and it says over the next 20 years, we need $48 million to stay, to get our units in good working order and to be maintained. And that's a significant cost that HUD just doesn't have. As a result, HUD has several tools that would allow us to move over to what they're calling a Section 8 platform, meaning the subsidy is it's a different form of funding, a different program. And so in doing that, we can go into a program called the Rental Assistance Demonstration. Not all our units are good candidates for that, but we know at least 245 units we could do that. Also our Tucson house, we plan to do a renovation and also do a RAD program on that. But then what about the rest of the units? We have about 1/4 of our units are 500 of the 1,500 units are single family homes. There could be opportunities for us to do affordable home ownership and to do some sales so that we can get additional income and develop new housing, and then take those subsidies from HUD in the Section 8 platform and put them into a new site. And part of this transforming is also having a different financial mechanism so that we could take out private financing if we needed to rehab the units, to do things that we need to do. So the short-term goal on this one is to develop a phased plan to rehabilitate our city-owned housing, to increase the units, and most importantly, create a sustainable funding system so that we can have these affordable units long-term. And that would be our first goal. Our second one is around building capacity in Tucson. And we know that we have some local nonprofit developers that have been very, very successful in us receiving low-income housing tax credit from the State Department of Housing. And they're doing a good job. We're wanting to come in and work alongside them to help develop housing as well. There's a lot of public housing authorities across the country that do a significant amount of development, meaning they increase units through the housing authority. And the way we see this goal is we would work with our nonprofit or for-profit developers to work in a co-development role to help us create more units. We also want to support our community partners who have done some development or are looking to do development and help increase their capacity as well.
And piggybacking, one thing I do want to bring up in terms of supporting potential developers, new developers, we're looking to support both the larger multifamily developers, but also smaller scale developers who are interested in more middle missing incremental development. And so in terms of feedback, we'll be curious to hear thoughts on ways we could do that.
The third policy is around prioritizing housing and helping identify those areas that could provide more opportunities. I'm going to ask Ann to go a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, one thing we have been talking to the commission about, and we'll do more so in the upcoming months, we have been creating a matrix checklist to help in terms of evaluating sites for affordable housing. So we know that thinking about the housing segregation patterns and thinking about providing opportunities for low-income people, we know what criteria are good in sites. So things like access to good public transportation, access to healthcare facilities, access to a grocery store in close proximity. So we are developing a scoring criteria on site location. And that will also help in terms of thinking about the money we do give away for affordable housing. And so in terms of developing the scoring criteria, we're also looking at what types of projects the city would invest in. So I mentioned us supporting projects that support the unhoused or support veterans, or have, in terms of affordability terms, have longer affordability periods or lower affordability limits. So we are developing a quantitative way to score those to help inform those decisions moving forward. And Liz, turning it back over to you.
Okay.
Do you want to mention that medium term?
Yes, thank you I keep missing that one. So the medium term goal is something that other communities have done. It's called, as you know, there's fair housing protections. And typically there's the, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of ethnicity, disability, religious protections. I'm just totally drawing a blank. I'm sorry, guys, but you know the fair housing protections. One of those that we're exploring is potentially getting one for income source. So for example, Beth was talking about Section 8. Someone might say that I have Section 8. That's an income source of providing a subsidy. So other communities have listed income source as a protected class. As a local ordinance, and that would allow, would require landlords to not discriminate based on income source. It could provide more options for participants in programs like Section 8, like rapid rehousing, which is some other programs that are out there. So this could help with that issue of losing landlords in the program. So that again is something that would take time and effort and exploration, and seeing if this is something that the mayor and council can and could potentially do.
One thing that I realized I forgot to mention in the beginning, in terms of the timeframes, what we're thinking of in terms of short term, those are things we think that we can work on and achieve in the next 1 to 2 years. Medium term, we're thinking more a 2 to 5 year time frame, and then you'll see the ongoing ones.
Okay, so expanding efforts to preserve and enhance existing housing. This past mayor and council meeting, they adopted a new ordinance. It's called the Casita Ordinance, which really is an accessory dwelling unit, which would allow homeowners to add a dwelling unit on the property if it meets the requirements. With that launch and that new ordinance, we would like to utilize funding to help improve existing casitas, existing ADUs to meet the code requirements. So we could use, and it would be for those who are low income to help repair and rehabilitate those units. Also, we would like to develop a manufactured housing rehabilitation program that is has always been an affordable housing option. So we know that investing in those type of units would help also expand options for people. Medium term is about, we're looking at creating a rental, multifamily rental rehab program, where if an owner of a multifamily site wants to utilize a loan to rehabilitate the property, we could have terms in there to ensure long-term affordability and acceptance of Section 8 program and other types of rental subsidies. And ongoing, we're working with the Arizona Department of Housing on a lot of things. One of them is to ensure that those properties that are currently for low-income households, they receive tax credits through the state. They usually go for about 20 years. After 20 years, they have the option to exit the program. We want to work with Arizona Department of Housing, and they're going to communicate with us as those properties come to that end of that affordability period, and try to ensure that we keep those properties affordable beyond the 20 years. So This one is not my cup of tea, so I'm going to turn this over to Ann and Corin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Corin Manning. I'm with Planning and Development Services, and our department has been working really closely with housing and community development on a lot of projects to support housing affordability in Tucson, and are working closely with them on developing this plan as well, because we know housing and development are very linked together. So a couple of the strategies, or sort of one category of strategies that we're thinking about, is updating our zoning regulations to encourage more affordable housing. Zoning is basically the set of regulations that tell you what you can build on a given piece of property, how big, what type of use, residential, commercial, etc. And those regulations have a lot of impact on how much housing can be built in a community, which then affects prices. And zoning is also can be a way to encourage affordable housing. So in the nearer term, we want to build on some of our recent successes. And we just adopted a new overlay on Broadway called the Sunshine Mile Overlay. And basically this is a zoning tool on Broadway that will allow new development to be mixed use development. And for the first time, we incorporated an incentive for affordable housing. So projects are incentivized to include affordable housing units alongside market rate units to create more mixed income housing. We really see this as a model for our approach to other transit corridors in the future around the city. So that's something that we want to build on as we do more planning for corridors like Oracle, South 6, and other corridors where we're making transit investments and thinking about long-term land uses. In the medium term, we're also looking at ways to promote more high quality, climate adapted and attractive new housing. So this is looking at how our zoning actually shapes the look and feel of new housing. And we want to make sure that that new housing is sustainable, adapted to our climate and our changing climate, by being energy efficient, and that it's designed in a way that fits with our neighborhoods and the style of our city, but also that offers different design options. So looking at how we can, through our zoning, make sure that we're allowing a variety of housing options. So we know that having more variety is one of the ways we can promote a range of housing prices. So not just a single family homes, but also making sure we're allowing apartments, townhouses, bungalow courts, a lot of different housing options, so that it meets a lot of different housing needs in our community. So that's something that we can do through zoning. And then we also want to look at updating our development standards and zoning standards to create tools to incentivize affordable housing. This could be reducing parking requirements for affordable housing projects. A lot of times affordable housing projects require less parking, there's less demand, and parking is something that adds a lot of cost to development, particularly when you're looking at doing affordable housing. So looking at things like parking, looking at setback and other standards that can make it difficult to develop affordable housing, particularly when we have smaller, more constrained lots, and our affordable housing developers are really looking to be economical with how they build housing. So those are some of the strategies we're looking at around zoning. We're also looking at other ways beyond just zoning to facilitate development and reduce costs of affordable housing. So in the near term, we're looking at ways to streamline our development review process, basically make it easier to go from design to build when you have an affordable housing project, make that permitting process faster, so that we can bring the units that we need to our community faster. And we also want to evaluate our impact fee program, make that something that can be used by more affordable housing developers. That's again a way of reducing costs for affordable housing, which then reduces costs for the eventual tenant and consumer of that housing. And then we're also looking at using some of our new tools like accessory dwelling units or casitas, which are now allowed across the city. We want to look at ways to make those casitas more affordable by looking at ways to incentivize those construction, provide financing tools and lending to make sure that we are getting affordable casitas in our community. And then longer term, we want to make sure that we are making it easy to adopt new technologies that can bring down costs of building housing, such as modular homes that could be repurposed shipping containers, other prefabricated housing options, 3D printed homes. These are some of the innovations happening right now that have potential to bring down housing costs and make it easier to build affordable housing and bring down the cost of market rate housing. And we want to make sure that it's easy to do those things in Tucson. So those are some of the strategies we have in mind, and later we'd love to get your feedback on those.
One thing I'll jump in, this picture is of the first 3D printed home in Arizona, I believe, and it's in Tempe. And my understanding is it should be complete at this time and people will be moving in the next couple of weeks. So something we've been keeping our eye on. If it's something that seems like it could work and be safe, something that could really drastically reduce costs.
I'm biting my tongue off because I spent years researching tiny houses. That's why I'm here. I'm shaking because I'm seeing that you guys are looking at this. Okay, I just want to say that. Let me know when there's time to input.
Thank you. We're getting there. We're on 10 total. And Liz, do you want to jump in here?
Yes, so I like excitement. Thank you for that.
Yeah, agree.
So developing affordable mixed income housing on city-owned properties. So we do, I just want to reiterate, mixed income is really looking at people at different income levels. So when we talk in our housing lingo, we look at area median income. So people that are at 80% of area median income is typically where it starts for low income, what we consider affordable for low income households, and then below. But we are looking short term to develop a phased development plan for our existing city sites that are large enough to produce these multifamily projects. We do have some smaller sites. We're doing some initial ones that are been working with the neighborhoods for quite a number of years, and we're hoping to get those off. Those are smaller parcels, and we'll be putting those out for RFP. Also looking at feasibility of city sites along the Sunshine Mile, which we had just heard a little bit about the overlay incentives. And so that would be an area we would try to do something and see how that works. Also acquire new properties that align with city priorities. And finally, to advance on development phase sites. That's what I was referring to, the city sites that we've been tasked to do for many years in those neighborhoods.
And just piggybacking, Liz mentioned the feasibility of the sites on Sunshine Mile. Because of the roadway project, there are some remnant parcels the city has. And so we're looking to see, they're pretty narrow if they really could support affordable housing projects.
All right, so enhancing efforts aimed at housing Tucsonans most vulnerable to housing instability. So when we think of that, we think of various populations. The first one is around persons fleeing domestic violence. So we're going to fund Emerge along with the county and a foundation to help expand their non-congregate shelter units. Also, the Affordable Housing Alliance, which is focusing on housing for older adults. There's a lot of planning and a lot of work that's happening right now. And as a city, we're lined up with them and working through that to see and hopefully see some really productive things coming out of that effort. And then we're also looking to support through funding small scale housing for youth and older adults. A medium term, Tucson House is one of the public housing sites that we mentioned earlier. For those that don't know, it's a high rise of about 400 plus units. And that is in need of significant rehabilitation. And we've been focusing on that through the Choice Neighborhoods program. And then finally, ongoing, looking at how we can develop new permanent supportive housing projects, which typically are geared to those persons experiencing homelessness, and finding ways to do that. Finally, pursuing funding streams for affordable housing. there's the existing funding that is typically used as the low-income housing tax credit. That's pretty much how affordable housing has been developed over the last couple decades. But we know that it's important for us to find new funding streams because it's not producing enough units for Tucson. So we have a housing trust fund. It just doesn't have a dedicated funding source. So trying to find out how we can reinstate that and find ways to fund it. Often housing trust funds are used to help provide gap financing for developers, which means it would be just another funding source to help them get the project done. Medium term, our Commission on Equitable Housing and Development is looking at some of these things, and we'll be providing recommendations around the funding stream, but also around seeing how they might get something on a bond election in the future. And then ongoing, advocating for more state and federal funding for housing. I want to share that we had a public housing resident and our vice chair for our commission, Mike Edmonds, who spoke to the Congress's Financial Services Committee around the Build Back Better Act and advocating to keep housing in that legislation. So we have a local advocate, and all of us can do our parts in communicating to our federal and state leaders around the need for more housing. And we have one last one, is around expanding education and outreach efforts. In the short term, we'll be putting out funding to local agencies who might be able to help us develop a housing resource connection program and coordinating that with the county and with the city. Ongoing, we know there's a lot of education. We know that housing is now on the radar for a lot of people that never was before because of the things that we've been talking about this whole meeting. But one of those for me personally is around the Housing Choice Voucher Program. We have a lot of, whether it's landlords, neighborhood residents that really say, I don't want Section 8 next to me, or I don't want to work with Section 8. I think that it's always had a bad stigma, and it's part of our role is to educate and help expand and destigmatize the program. Also to help our residents know about things, programs that are available to them, like the property tax reduction for homeowners, and also other other programs that we have around rehabilitation for homes for low-income homeowners. So there's a lot of things we can do to really expand that information and knowledge to the full community. And those are our 10 goals, Anne.
All right. So I think that now would be a good time. Jeremiah, can you put the poll in the chat? So I know that was a lot of information, and I promise you this will be up on the website soon so that you can have time to really look at it, digest, and provide comments. That said, I do want to, Jeremiah Dean, just put a link for those that are able to take this survey now. I'm going to actually share my screen and help explain how it works. So we just walked through those 10 goals. This is a survey where we have the 10 goals listed, and we would love you to help us understand what you think are most important. What is the priority for you? So for instance, we talked about preservation. So really fixing what we have now. If you think that's the number one thing, you put that at the top. And so you can just use your cursor and move these up and down. So please try to take that survey now, and we'll share those results in the next couple minutes.
How do you get there?
So Jeremiah Dean in the chat included a link. It is the second to last comment. If you click on that link from Jeremiah Dean.
Thanks again for attending me. No, it's not that one. You gotta scroll down.
Yeah, it was at 5:26 p.m.
Okay, let me get that because I feel very strongly about this.
And we will break out too, to really give people more of a chance to dive in and talk about what's more important to them.
And I just wanted to say too, when you're done taking or arranging those in order, please make sure to click the submit button at the bottom in order for those results to be sent to us.
Good call, Jeremiah. I didn't scroll down enough. And I will say I'm grateful. There's a lot of comments in the chat. If we don't address your comments today, I do plan on doing a question and answer after, making sure that we at least respond, because we really appreciate people sharing information and thoughts. And so as people are wrapping up their surveys, I will take a few more comments now if people do want to share. And one thing I didn't share before is feel free to unmute yourself, but in the at the bottom of your screen, for those that aren't as familiar with Zoom, there's the reactions. If you click on that, that's one way to raise your hand. I'm also perfectly fine if you unmute and want to start talking. So for the next minute or two while people are wrapping up, does anyone want to just start giving preliminary thoughts in terms of those initiatives? And Rocco, I'll pick on you to talk about tiny homes, and I'd be curious. So once we decide on these initiatives and actions, we will be building out what the city can do to help facilitate that. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, there's two directions I go. I could give general information about my perceptions of it and why it's good and what the pros and cons of it is. Or I could talk about actual ideas I have, but that's probably for the idea people, but I'd be glad to share. I just want to say,
I would just say we'll break out into breakout soon. I would say keep this one fairly succinct in terms of what you think are a few things the city can do now. And then when we get to the breakouts, feel free to go into a lot more detail.
Okay. If there's anyone like me out there in Section 8, I'm a singular person who doesn't care about frills. That's a big part of the tiny house minimalist movement life. I have plenty of money, okay? And I have what I need, but I don't have what I don't need. Okay, I got rid of everything. That's a big part of the whole mindset of this. And a lot of building costs have to do with post-World War II. We saved the world, and we're gonna have luxury and big, and things that are about aesthetics that really are not even that important. You know, like they build electrical. You know, everyone's got to plug something. They're gonna have plugs in the wall, with wires going up the wall, and that's really expensive to put together. We've seen buildings that have like electric boxes that are outside the wall. We've all seen these, and then there's like a pipe. It's actually a thing you undo, and you put this.
Excuse me, Rocco.
Stuff like that. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is not a time for public comment yet. We're going to get in groups here soon.
Oh, okay. What are you looking for on this? Just to specify.
Yeah, just hold on. Yeah, if you can mute yourself, we'll get you in a group soon.
Okay. Yeah.
And Jeremiah, how's the survey results coming?
So far we have 23 responses. I'm happy to share what that looks like if you want.
Yeah, I'd say go for it.
Okay, so you can see the different policy initiatives in order from rank 1 to 10 on the left side, and then on the right side you can see the percentages, how many times this, for example, this one right here is the first choice, and it was chosen as the first choice 26% of the time. But you can kind of get an idea of, these ones down at the bottom ranked pretty low as they were the 9th, 10th choice quite often. So
Jeremiah, are you able to zoom in just a little bit? Looks like there was a comment that it's hard to read.
let's see here. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay.
And can you do one refresh? Great. And again, we will be posting this story map presentation to the website, and we are going to also develop a survey we know a lot of people couldn't be here today, but to help go into a little more detail on that. I'm going to keep going. Elaine, did you have one quick comment that you can do pretty succinctly before we move to the last part of the draft plan?
Not so much a comment. I guess I have a question, but I think it can wait. So go ahead.
Okay. And we will, as I said, we'll break out into groups to be able to have a little more discussion. So the last section is the second to last section of the plan, but the last section we're focusing on today is the funding overview. And so we wanted to give some information in terms of what the city receives in terms of funding to support the preservation and construction of housing. Thing I wanted to say, we had our session with the developers this morning and wanted to provide a little bit of context to root the conversation. So a rough estimate of a cost of capital construction to rehabilitate and build housing is $300,000-ish per door. And I do want to say a lot of caveats there. It varies wildly depending on the project. So if you're looking at doing a tiny home or an ADU, it can be quite a bit cheaper than that. But so that cost does vary depending on what you're looking at doing, and that costs are changing rapidly. So that number was a lot less a year ago when we asked the similar question to developers that are working in affordable housing. But just to sort of root the conversation, wanted to give some idea of how much it costs to build or preserve an affordable housing unit. So that said, I'm going to move into the funding we receive. So this is on an annual basis. This is the different funding sources that the city receives that really supports housing. And so the home program, I will say that is a consortium with Pima County. That is the city's share. That doesn't count the county's share. And so depending on the program, the largest one is the choice voucher program, providing subsidies to stay in private rental units. One thing I wanted to be sure to stress, though, is much of that funding is committed because it's committed to supporting our HUD-assisted residents. So between our public housing and our Section 8 voucher holders, the Housing and Community Development supports over 17,000 residents. And this is a little bit of information on our HUD-assisted residents. So the average income is $11,000. And then a little bit in terms of race, ethnicity, and age. And so the bulk of our funding really goes to support these HUD-assisted residents. So that said, we did want to give an approximate idea of what is available to support community members in terms of development. And so on an annual basis, this is how much that we have been and plan to support development in the future. So we get the $2.5 million in home funding. A lot of that goes to down payment assistance programs and some other things housing does. But we do have $370,000 a year needs to go to a community housing development organization. And then we have about $1.5 million each year that we plan to support affordable housing projects moving forward. That said, the annual amount has been allocated already for next year. But for this annual amount, this will start a year from now. We'll put out an application process to start doing that regularly, but we'll talk about what we're going to be doing in the meantime. The second area where we're looking to support developments is through project-based vouchers. And we'll just keep this really succinct. We can go into this more, but essentially that really helps support multifamily developers in making their projects work. So Housing Community Development is looking to put out about 50 project-based vouchers a year for the next 5 years. And so thinking back to the policy initiative about trying to grow affordable housing money, that's on an annual basis. That's not a lot of money that the city has to really help make those projects pencil out. And we know that in many cases, affordable housing without additional subsidies doesn't pencil out. That said, there is some good news. Thanks to the American Rescue Plan, there is some more funding right now that can go towards housing. And so here is funding that's restricted specifically for housing. And so there is some funding to help support more rent and utility assistance for households that have needed that. There's some emergency housing vouchers to help people get into housing. Those are programs that are already committed out, but that middle category there, this year, we're receiving more home funding specific to support what they call qualified populations, which is mostly persons currently experiencing homelessness, victims of domestic violence, and the most extreme low-income households. And then last but not least, the other, and I'll actually turn this over to Liz if you want to wrap up with this.
Sure. So the city mayor, the city's mayor and council has received local ARPA funds, and they've created a list of different types of activities that we want to fund in the community. These 5 here are those programs. I mentioned them a little bit earlier around the Housing Development Fund, the Housing Resource Connection Program, the Small Scale for Senior and Youth Housing, Manufactured Housing Rehab Program, and also Affordable Housing Acquisition. The funding is going to be announced shortly, and a process for agencies, nonprofits who want to apply. And so I don't have any details around it except to say look out for it. I think our goal is to go live with this application process November 5th. So don't hold me to it, but that is our goal date. We believe we'll do some workshops around what this funding is for agencies to know how to apply. And that, I believe it'll be around November 8th, 9th, or 10th. And again, stay tuned. We'll be putting information out when that does become available.
And then last thing I do want to mention, this plan is really focused on action and really trying to see some results sooner than later. So we do, for all of those 10 policy initiatives, we do plan on having a section that's dedicated towards those short-term actions that were identified and really laying out what is that action, what are the steps it's going to take to get there, what's the funding that's available or not available and is needed, and really status of that. And we'll keep that updated to hopefully show progress over the next year or two to really meeting these goals that hopefully eventually mayor and council will adopt after we get a lot more feedback. So speaking of feedback, we've talked enough. I think that now is a really good time. We do want to give you all an opportunity to dive deeper into these initiatives and give more feedback to us. And so I know it's 5:40 now. What we're going to do is break out evenly into groups and give you some chance to dive into these issues more and share the thoughts you have. And then we'll come back together briefly. And then we do have, if people really want to talk about specific goals, we will offer a second breakout where you'll get to choose what group you go to if there's a specific topic you want to get into way more detail on. So I will say Rachel will divide us in groups, and it will just divide you into it. So shortly you'll be in a group and there will be a staff member to help you in that process.
I'm gonna open the breakout rooms right now for all of us, and I'll see you guys shortly.